3 in the morning, and King Magnus Ironclaw stood alone in the war room, hands pressed flat against the map table to hide their slight tremor. The condition had started 6 months ago, doctors whispering words like degenerative and inevitable. He'd stopped listening after the first diagnosis. A king didn't need medical terms for what his body already told him with brutal clarity. 15 red marks dotted the northern border map, 15 outposts gone silent in 3 months. The pattern screamed coordinated attack to anyone who understood warfare, but his council dismissed every warning as paranoia from an aging warrior who couldn't accept peace. Maybe they were right to worry about his judgment. After all, he'd spent 10 years chasing a ghost, searching for a son his dying wife claimed existed in her fever dreams. 10 years of false leads and empty hope while his kingdom needed an heir. The mate bond ceremony today was supposed to fix everything. 300 unmated females presenting themselves, and maybe, finally, the moon goddess would grant him the bond that would secure his throne. General Aldrich Stoneheart entered without knocking, as he had for 30 years. Brothers in all but blood, though lately Magnus caught himself studying his oldest friend with new suspicion. The intelligence leaks had to come from someone with high-level access, someone who'd been pushing peace negotiations with territories that might harbor threats. Someone like Aldrich. "Your Majesty, you haven't slept," Aldrich said, concern etched in his weathered face. "How can I sleep when 15 of our soldiers have vanished?" Magnus gestured at the map. "This isn't coincidence. This is an army probing our defenses. Or it's bad luck and harsh winter. Starting a war based on instinct will destabilize everything we've built. My instinct kept us alive through 5 campaigns, and I trust it with my life. But the Council needs more than instinct." Aldrich moved closer, lowering his voice. "Go through with the ceremony, find your mate, secure the succession. Then we can investigate the outposts properly." Magnus wanted to argue but recognized the tactical logic. A bonded king with an heir removed half the political ammunition his opponents wielded. Personal desires didn't matter. They never had. "The presentation ceremony begins at noon," Aldrich continued. 300 candidates have traveled across the kingdom. Canceling now would cause panic. "Fine," Magnus said, the word tasting like defeat. "But double the guard rotations, and send quiet inquiries to our allied kingdoms about reinforcements." After Aldrich left, Magnus remained staring at those 15 red marks. Somewhere out there, an enemy was gathering. He could feel it in his bones the same way he felt the tremor spreading through his hands. The ceremony hall gleamed with false cheerfulness, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows onto polished marble. Magnus sat on his throne in full ceremonial armor, the crown heavy on his graying hair. Not the young warrior king anymore, but a 55-year-old ruler whose body was betraying him one nerve ending at a time. 300 unmated females stood in precise formation, this ritual more military inspection than romantic fantasy. The kingdom needed soldiers, not courtiers. If a bond occurred, excellent. If not, they'd receive deployment orders and serve through combat instead of bloodline. One by one they approached, bowed, and Magnus felt nothing. No pull, no recognition, just an endless parade of faces that blurred together. By the 100th candidate, exhaustion was setting in, making his hands shake worse despite his efforts to control them. Then he saw her. Not a candidate, a servant in gray uniform, moving along the hall's edge with supplies. But something about her gait caught his attention. Too controlled, too fluid. That was a warrior's walk disguised as a maid's shuffle. Magnus's wolf stirred for the first time in months. Interest piqued. Who was she? And why was a trained fighter pretending to be invisible? He dismissed the rest of the ceremony with mechanical efficiency, assigning all 300 candidates to various battalions. No bonds, no sparks of destiny, just another failure in a decade of failures. As the hall emptied, Magnus caught Aldrich's attention with a subtle gesture. "The servant in gray who left through the eastern door. Find out who she is." "A servant, Your Majesty?" "A servant who moves like she's done combat training. Either we have a security breach or something else is happening." Magnus spent the afternoon in meetings he barely registered, his mind circling back to that gray uniformed figure. Something about her had woken his wolf from its long dormant state, and he couldn't explain why. Late afternoon found him heading toward the celestial chamber for a scheduled intelligence briefing. He pushed open the door and stopped. She was there, polishing the massive windows, sunlight catching in hair the color of honey, darkened by shadow. When she turned at his entrance, their eyes met. The mate bond hit like lightning striking bone. Magnus felt it explode through his chest, a connection snapping into place with force that stole his breath. The room spun, his vision doubling, and suddenly he wasn't standing in the chamber, but on a battlefield surrounded by thousands of corpses. She stood beside him, covered in blood and glory, fighting back to back against an enemy that moved wrong, fought wrong like animated death itself. Then the vision shattered and he was back, staring at a woman who looked equally shocked. Her hand, he noticed with something dark and possessive coiling in his gut, wore a cheap silver ring. "Your Majesty." She dropped into a deep bow, but Magnus could smell the fear rolling off her. Good. She'd felt the bond too. "I apologize. I was told to prepare this chamber. I'll leave immediately." "Stay." The word came out rougher than intended, edged with alpha command that made her body lock in instinctive obedience. Magnus felt savage satisfaction at her response. She was wolf then, his wolf, whether she knew it yet or not. He circled her slowly, every predatory instinct awakened after years of dormancy. She kept her head bowed, but her shoulders were rigid with tension, ready to fight or flee. "What's your name?" "Sarah Blackthorne, Your Majesty." "How long have you worked in the palace?" 3 weeks, Your Majesty." 3 weeks. And in that time, had anyone else noticed the warrior hiding beneath servants' clothes? Or had she been too careful, too well trained? "You're wearing a ring." It wasn't a question. Magnus moved closer, near enough to scent her properly. She smelled like steel and determination underneath the harsh servant soap. Nothing like the perfumed candidates from the ceremony. Everything his wolf wanted. "I'm engaged, Your Majesty, to a stable hand. We plan to marry after harvest." The word sent a spike of pure possessive fury through Magnus's chest. His wolf snarled at the idea of another male's claim on their mate. It took every ounce of control not to shift right there, not to show her exactly who she belonged to, regardless of cheap rings and plans. "Take it off," he heard himself say, voice dropping to a dangerous register. Her head snapped up, brown eyes wide. "I'm sorry?" "The ring." Magnus closed the distance between them until he could feel her body heat. "Take it off. Now." He watched emotions flicker across her face. Confusion, understanding, then something that looked like fear mixed with unwilling attraction. She'd felt the bond, knew what it meant, and was trying to deny it anyway. "Your Majesty, I don't understand what's happening, but I'm engaged. I've made promises." "I'm not asking as your king." Magnus let his alpha presence fill the space between them, watched her pupils dilate in response. "I'm telling you as your mate. The bond has activated. Do you feel it?" Her breathing had gone shallow, chest rising and falling rapidly. "Yes, but that doesn't change my commitments. I'm nobody, Your Majesty, a servant. This has to be a mistake. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, and you're lying." Magnus caught her scent shifting, arousal mixing with the fear. She wanted this as much as her mind was trying to reject it. Nobody who moves like you do is a simple servant. That threw her. He saw calculation replace shock in her eyes, reassessing him. "Give me the ring," Magnus said, extending his palm. "Because seeing another male's claim on you makes my wolf want to hunt him down and remind him who you truly belong to." "That's not fair to him." But her voice had lost some of its certainty. "He's a good man." "Probably." Magnus held her gaze. "But he's not your mate. I am. And fighting this bond will only make us both miserable. So give me the ring and we'll figure out what comes next." She stared at him for a long moment, and Magnus felt the exact second she surrendered. Her hand came up, twisting the silver band off her finger, with movements that looked like they cost her something vital. She held it out, not placing it in his palm, but keeping distance. Magnus took it carefully, deliberately brushing his fingers against hers. The contact sent electricity arcing between them, and he heard her sharp intake of breath. The bond pulsed, strengthening, demanding more contact, more connection. "There's a reading room through that door," Magnus said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Wait there. Don't leave. Don't speak to anyone. I need to think. And if I refuse, then I'll have the guards escort you, and that will raise questions neither of us are ready to answer." Magnus softened his tone fractionally. "Please, Sarah, just a few hours." She studied him with those sharp brown eyes, and he realized she was assessing him the same way he'd assess an opponent, not with a subordinate's fear, but a soldier's tactical calculation. "Fine, but I want answers, real ones." "You'll get them." After Magnus closed his fist around the ring, feeling the metal bite into his palm. After I figure out what the moon goddess is playing at, giving me a mate who belongs to someone else. After she disappeared into the reading room, Magnus stood alone and felt the bond settle deeper into his chest. It pulsed with each heartbeat, a rhythm that matched Sarah's even through the closed door. He could sense her presence, her confusion, her reluctant attraction. This was a disaster. A mate who was engaged. A mate who was clearly more than she appeared. A mate whose existence would destabilize every careful political balance he'd maintained. And his wolf didn't care about any of it. Just wanted to march through that door, claim her properly, make sure every male in the kingdom knew she was taken. Magnus looked down at the cheap silver ring in his palm and made a decision. Whatever Sarah was hiding, whoever she really was, they'd face it together. The bond had activated. Destiny had spoken. Now he just had to survive the consequences. Hours later, Magnus returned to find Sarah in the reading room, curled in an armchair with an ancient text on wolf mythology. She looked up when he entered, and the bond flared between them, hungry and demanding. "You're not a servant," Magnus said without preamble. "So who are you really?" Sarah closed the book slowly. "Captain Sarah Blackthorne, 3rd Battalion, Special Operations. General Aldrich assigned me to undercover work 3 weeks ago." The revelation should have shocked him. Instead, pieces clicked into place. Investigating what? Intelligence leaks. Someone in the palace is feeding information to external forces. I narrowed it to 3 suspects. Magnus felt ice settle in his gut. Who? Sarah met his eyes steadily. General Aldrich himself, Lord Silas Gravenmore from the council, or head housekeeper Maris. One of them was a traitor, and one of them might be the man Magnus trusted more than anyone alive. The bond pulsed between them as Magnus processed this. His mate was a soldier investigating his inner circle for treason. The moon goddess definitely had a twisted sense of humor. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "That vision we both saw when the bond hit. I've seen those creatures before in intelligence reports. They're called Wraiths, vampires bonded with necromancers. We thought they were extinct. They were supposed to be." Magnus moved to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "I helped hunt the last nest 15 years ago during the border wars. If they're back, the kingdom isn't ready," Sarah finished, "which is why I need to complete my investigation. Find the traitor before they can do more damage." Magnus turned back to face her. "And the bond? What do we do about that?" "I don't know." Sarah stood, moving toward him with that predator's grace. "I didn't ask for this. I had a simple life planned, a good man who wanted to marry me, a future that made sense. Neither did I." Magnus could feel the pull between them, magnetic and inevitable. But we can't ignore it, especially not if war is coming. That vision showed us fighting together. Maybe that's the point. She was close enough now that he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to scent the attraction she was trying to hide. Maybe. Or maybe the moon goddess is just cruel. Only one way to find out. Magnus reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face with his palm, feeling her lean into the touch despite herself. "We face this together. Find your traitor, prepare for whatever's coming, and figure out what this bond means." "And my fiancé? I'll handle it." Magnus hated the words even as he spoke them. "Fairly. He'll be compensated, given options. But Sarah, you need to understand something. The bond doesn't give us choices about who we want. It tells us who we need." She searched his eyes for a long moment. "I'm not easy," she warned. "I don't know how to be a queen. Don't know how to navigate court politics or smile at people I don't trust." "Good," Magnus said. "I don't need easy. I need a warrior who can fight beside me when everything goes to hell. And based on that vision, everything is about to go to hell very soon." The bond pulsed between them, and Magnus saw the exact moment Sarah stopped fighting it. She rose on her toes and kissed him, fierce and demanding, a warrior's claiming rather than a maiden's surrender. Magnus responded in kind, pulling her against him, one hand tangling in her hair while the other splayed across her lower back. The bond sang between them, physical contact making it stronger, more real, impossible to deny. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah's eyes had gone slightly unfocused. "That was inevitable," Magnus finished. "The bond won't be denied. We can fight it, make ourselves miserable, or we can accept it and deal with the complications. I vote for dealing with complications. Sarah stepped back, visibly pulling herself together. So what's the plan? Tomorrow morning, Emergency War Council. We lay out everything. The missing outposts, the intelligence leaks, the bond. Force the traitor to make a move. That's risky. If the traitor is Aldrich, then I'll have lost my oldest friend. Magnus felt the weight of that possibility settle on his shoulders. But the kingdom comes first. It always has. A concussive boom shook the entire palace. Books flew from shelves, cracks spiderwebbed across the stone walls. Magnus grabbed Sarah to keep her from falling as the floor buckled beneath them. "What in the name of the moon?" Sarah started. Magnus was already moving toward the door. That came from the north wall. "We're under attack." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and chaos, guards shouting, servants screaming. Through a window, Magnus saw orange firelight illuminating the night sky. The north wall had been breached, and pouring through the gap came creatures he'd hoped never to see again. Wraiths. Hundreds of them, moving with inhuman coordination, eyes glowing sickly green, bodies twisted into shapes that violated natural law. And standing atop the rubble of the shattered wall, a figure in black armor that seemed to absorb all light. The Wraith Queen had come to the capital herself. "Formation!" Magnus roared, his alpha command cutting through panic. He shifted into his dire wolf form, the transformation hurting more than it used to, but adrenaline overriding the pain. Beside him, Sarah shifted too, her wolf smaller but radiating alpha prime power that made nearby soldiers' eyes go wide. They threw themselves into battle, fighting side by side as the Bond vision had shown. But for every wraith that fell, 2 more poured through the breach. The dead were rising, controlled by necromantic power, becoming weapons against their former comrades. "We can't hold this," Sarah sent through the Bond. "There are too many." Magnus knew she was right. This wasn't a battle they could win through valor. This was strategic retreat or death. He was giving the order to fall back when Sarah's power exploded outward. Silver light flooded the courtyard, and wraiths shrieked as their bodies smoked and burned where the light touched them. Those closest to Sarah simply disintegrated, reduced to ash. Even the Wraith Queen on her wall perch seemed to hesitate, those dead eyes fixed on this unexpected threat. Then Sarah collapsed. Magnus caught her before she hit the ground, feeling through the bond how much that power use had cost her. Her skin was burning hot, her breathing ragged. "I don't know what I just did," she gasped. "The power just came." "You're an Alpha Prime," Magnus said, cradling her. "That's what they do. Channel the moon goddess directly. The history books say it kills them eventually. Not if I can help it." Magnus looked around at the temporary reprieve Sarah's power had bought them. The wraiths had been driven back beyond the walls, but they'd regroup soon. Aldrich appeared, covered in blood. "Your Majesty, we need to evacuate. The north wall is compromised, and we can't defend multiple breach points." "Evacuate to where?" "Iron Fortress, 200 miles north through the mountains. It's our only chance." Magnus made the calculation in seconds. Half the people in the palace couldn't make that journey. The elderly, the children, the wounded. They'd die on the march or die here when the wraiths returned. But staying meant certain death for everyone. "Assemble evacuation teams," Magnus ordered. "Civilians first. We leave at first light." "And Aldrich," his eyes met his old friend's. "We need to talk about some intelligence concerns. After we survive tonight." Something flickered in Aldrich's expression. "Of course, Your Majesty." As Aldrich left to implement orders, Magnus held Sarah close, feeling the bond pulse between them. They'd found each other at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way. But as he looked at the breach in the wall, at the gathering darkness on the horizon where more wraiths would be massing, Magnus realized the moon goddess might have perfect timing after all. They were going to need every advantage to survive what was coming. And a mate bond with an Alpha Prime? That was the kind of advantage that could turn impossible odds into slim chances. The evacuation began in darkness, 3,000 souls streaming through the palace gates. Magnus stood counting them, every face a responsibility. Sarah worked alongside the Wolf Guard, organizing supply wagons with military efficiency she no longer bothered hiding. Somewhere in the organized chaos, a stable hand was being told his fiancée was the king's mate. Magnus had sent soldiers to handle it with as much kindness as the situation allowed. Money, land, a fresh start far from the capital. It wouldn't ease the heartbreak, but it was all Magnus could offer. Sarah found him as the last wagons rolled out. "He's gone," she said quietly. Owen. They gave him the settlement and he left without wanting to see me. That's probably for the best. Magnus pulled her close, not caring who saw. Less painful than a goodbye. She nodded against his chest, and through the bond he felt her guilt mixing with relief. The bond was rewriting their loyalties whether they wanted it or not. The column began moving north as dawn broke, leaving behind the palace Magnus had held for 20 years. Leaving behind the dead they couldn't bury, the wounded too broken to move, the volunteers who'd chosen to buy time with their lives. Magnus looked back once at the city skyline, smoke rising from a dozen fires. When he returned, if he returned, nothing would be the same. The Wraiths were coming, the kingdom was fracturing, and somewhere in the chaos ahead, a traitor still worked in shadows. But Magnus Ironclaw had fought impossible battles before, had bled for this realm, had found his mate against all odds. He was a warrior king with failing hands and divine destiny, and he would be damned if he surrendered now. The march to Iron Fortress had begun. Time to see who would survive until tomorrow. The column stretched 2 miles through hostile territory, 3,000 refugees moving like a wounded serpent toward uncertain safety. Magnus rode at the front, armor dulled to avoid reflections, every sense alert for ambush. The bond let him track Sarah's position with the scout teams miles ahead, a constant warm pressure against his chest that reassured even as it distracted. 2 days into the march, and they'd already lost people. The elderly who couldn't keep pace, children who succumbed to exposure. Each death carved another piece from Magnus's soul, but he couldn't afford to stop, couldn't afford grief. General Aldrich commanded the rear guard, 500 soldiers protecting the column's vulnerable tail. Magnus had been watching his old friend carefully since the palace attack, looking for signs of betrayal, hoping desperately to find none. "Your Majesty," a messenger approached, breathless. "Captain Blackthorn reports enemy scouts 2 miles northeast. Small numbers but tracking our movement. Tell her to eliminate them quietly. We can't afford the main Wraith force knowing our exact position." The messenger departed, and Magnus felt Sarah's acknowledgement through the bond, followed by grim determination. She was in her element now, hunting threats in the wilderness. The soldier he'd married, not the servant she'd pretended to be, married. They hadn't formalized it, but the mate bond was as binding as any ceremony. More so, really. Some part of Magnus still couldn't believe the moon goddess had given him this, a second chance at partnership when he'd thought that door closed forever with Elena's death. Lord Silas Gravenmore approached on horseback, his expensive robes replaced with practical travel gear that still somehow looked refined. "Your Majesty, might we discuss our situation?" "Walk with me." Magnus dismounted, needing to move, needing to think. They walked in silence for several minutes before Silas spoke. "I've been calculating our resources. 2 weeks of supplies if we ration severely. Maybe 10 days' march to Iron Fortress at our current pace. We're cutting it close." "Closer than you think." Magnus kept his voice low. "Sarah's scouts report Wraith forces ahead blocking the main pass. We'll have to fight through or find another route." "The western route through Blackwood Forest? Cursed territory. We'd lose half the civilians to whatever haunts those woods." Magnus shook his head. "No, we push through the Wraith blockade, hit them hard and fast. That will cost lives." "Everything costs lives," Magnus said tiredly. "We just try to make the costs mean something." Silas was quiet for a moment. "I've been meaning to speak with you about Captain Blackthorn. The bond, it's quite sudden. Are you certain she can be trusted?" The question sent possessive anger flaring through Magnus's chest. His wolf snarled at the implied doubt about their mate. "She's investigating the intelligence leaks. Has 3 suspects, actually. You're one of them." To his credit, Silas didn't flinch. "Am I? On what evidence?" "Trade agreements with questionable clauses. Questions about my health and succession that suggest you're preparing for regime change." Magnus watched Silas carefully. "Want to convince me you're loyal?" "I've served this kingdom for 30 years, Silas said. "But I understand suspicion in these times. If you want proof, I'll submit to whatever verification you require." Memory wine. "Tomorrow morning, you, Aldrich, and Maris. We'll clear this up before we reach the fortress." Silas nodded slowly, agreed, "though I suspect you'll find the traitor isn't who you expect." Magnus felt unease crawl down his spine at those words. "What do you know?" "Only that betrayal often comes from those closest to us." Silas met his eyes, the ones we'd never suspect because we love them too much to see clearly. That night they made cold camp in a defensible valley, no fires to reveal their position. Magnus found Sarah among the wounded, her hands glowing faintly with Alpha Prime power as she healed a soldier's infected leg wound. Each healing seemed to age her slightly, gray threading through her dark hair. "You need to stop," Magnus said, pulling her away gently. "You're burning yourself out." "He'll die if I don't help." Sarah's voice was thick with exhaustion. "And you'll die if you keep this up." Magnus cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I need you alive, Sarah. Selfish as that sounds, I need you." She leaned into his touch, and through the bond he felt her conflicting emotions. The soldier's duty to save who she could warring with the mate's need to survive for her partner. "Take me somewhere private," she whispered. "I need to feel something other than death for a few minutes." Magnus led her to a secluded area behind a rock formation, far enough from camp for privacy. The moment they were alone, Sarah kissed him with desperate hunger, hands fisting in his armor. He responded in kind, the bond singing between them, amplifying every touch. This was what they both needed: affirmation of life in the face of constant death, connection in the midst of chaos. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of dying in battle. I'm scared the Alpha Prime power will consume me before I get to really live with you." "Then we find a way to control it," Magnus said fiercely. "The ancient texts mention Alpha Primes who lived full lives. We'll find those records, learn how they managed it. And if we can't, then we make every moment count." Magnus tilted her chin up. "I spent 10 years searching for a son I thought was dead. 10 years of grief and empty hope. I won't waste whatever time we have together." They made love there under the stars, urgent and fierce, the bond wrapping around them like a living thing. For a few precious minutes, there was no war, no wraiths, no impossible odds, just two souls finding each other across the wreckage of their carefully planned lives. Afterward, lying tangled together, Sarah spoke quietly. "Tomorrow's memory wine session. What if it's Aldrich? Then I'll have lost my oldest friend." Magnus stared up at the stars. "But I'll have closure. Not knowing is worse." The morning brought Lord Silas, General Aldrich, and head housekeeper Maris to the command tent. Sarah stood ready with the memory wine, her expression professionally neutral despite the tension crackling through the space. "You all know why we're here," Magnus said. "Someone has been feeding intelligence to the Wraiths. That traitor is one of you three. The memory wine will prove who." "This is outrageous," Maris protested, her weathered face pale. "I've served this palace for 25 years. "Then you have nothing to fear from proving it." Magnus turned to Sarah. "Who drinks first?" Before Sarah could answer, Maris stepped forward. "I'll do it. I want my name cleared." The wine worked quickly. Magnus took Maris's hand and fell into her memories, seeing the palace through decades of loyal service. Then the kidnapping, brutal and swift, Wraith scouts taking her daughter in the night, the ransom demands, the impossible choice between duty and love. He saw every intelligence report Maris had provided, guard rotations, supply routes, defensive weaknesses, all to keep her daughter alive until 3 weeks ago when the Wraith sent proof of death. The girl had been dead for years. When the memory sharing ended, Magnus stumbled back. "You gave them everything." Maris was crying silently. "They had my daughter. I believed them. I kept believing even when I should have known." "How much did they know about our evacuation plans?" "Everything," Maris whispered, "including the route to Iron Fortress. They're waiting for you." Magnus felt ice flood his veins. The Wraith blockade wasn't opportunistic. It was a prepared ambush, and they were marching straight into it. Aldrich moved fast, drawing his sword. "Traitor, you've killed us all." "Stand down," Magnus commanded. His mind was already racing through tactical implications. Maris was a weapon, but weapons could be turned. "You're going to help us." "What?" "You're going to keep feeding the Wraiths information. False information. New routes, fake supply numbers, deliberate weaknesses in places we're actually strong. We turn your betrayal into our advantage." "They'll kill me when they realize," Maris said. "Probably," Magnus agreed coldly. "But it gives 3,000 people a chance to survive. Your choice. Die now as a traitor or die later as a hero who tried to make amends." Maris looked at the assembled officers, at Sarah's hard expression, at Magnus's unyielding gaze. "I'll do it. For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead," Sarah said, "but useful might save the living." After Maris was confined under guard, Magnus turned to Aldrich and Silas. "That clears you both, unless either wants to volunteer for the memory wine anyway." "I'll drink," Silas said immediately. "Because there's something you need to know, Magnus, something I've kept hidden for 30 years. Magnus felt dread settle in his stomach. "What?" Silas uncorked the vial and swallowed before Magnus could stop him. Then he gripped Magnus's hand, and the world exploded into shared memory. Magnus saw his mother, Queen Seraphina, young and beautiful and desperately in love with a man who wasn't King Marcus. Saw secret meetings, stolen moments, a love affair that produced a child. Saw Marcus's rage when infant Magnus was born with amber eyes that were Gravenmore traits, not Nightshade. Saw his childhood through new context. The beatings, the silver chains, the constant cruelty. Not because Marcus was a tyrant to everyone, but because Magnus was living proof of Seraphina's betrayal. Saw Silas watching from the shadows, loving his biological son from a distance, unable to claim him without destroying them both. The memory sharing ended and Magnus staggered, his entire sense of identity fracturing. Aldrich caught him before he fell. "You're my father," Magnus said, the words feeling alien in his mouth. "All this time." "Yes," Silas said quietly. "And I'm sorry I never told you, but Marcus would have killed us both if the truth came out. This creates a succession crisis," Aldrich said, his tactical mind already seeing the implications. If Magnus's claim to the throne is based on being Marcus's heir, and he's not actually Marcus's blood— "I killed Marcus in legal single combat," Magnus interrupted. "That gave me the throne by right of conquest, not bloodline. My legitimacy stands." "But the council doesn't know that," Sarah said. "If this information gets out, Isolde's faction will use it to challenge your authority." "Which is why it doesn't get out," Silas said. "I've kept this secret for 30 years. I can keep it until we're through this crisis." Magnus looked at the man who was apparently his biological father, trying to reconcile 30 years of thinking Silas was just a political ally. "Why tell me now?" "Because if I die in the coming battles, you deserve to know the truth." Silas's expression was pained. "And because I'm tired of pretending I don't care when you're in danger. You're my son, Magnus. I've been proud of you every day, even if I couldn't say it." The bond pulsed as Sarah moved to Magnus's side, offering silent support. Through their connection, he felt her shock matching his own, but also acceptance. She'd learned the hard way that family came in unexpected forms. "This doesn't change anything tactically," Magnus said, forcing himself back into command mode. "We still have a Wraith blockade to break through. But after we survive," he looked at Silas, "we're going to have a long conversation about family secrets." "I look forward to it," Silas said. "Son." The word hit Magnus harder than he'd expected. Decades of longing for a father who wasn't cruel, suddenly fulfilled in the worst possible timing. But he pushed the emotion down, compartmentalized it. Time to process feelings after they weren't running for their lives. The Wraith blockade waited in a narrow valley, exactly where Maris had said it would be. 500 undead soldiers dug into positions on the ridges above, turning the passage into a kill zone. Magnus studied the terrain with Sarah, Aldrich, and his battalion commanders. "We can't go around without adding a week to the journey. We don't have supplies for that." "We fight through," Aldrich said. "Classic hammer and anvil. Heavy infantry advances under shield cover while cavalry charges through at full speed." "They'll slaughter us," one of the younger officers objected. "Some of us," Magnus agreed, "but not all, and right now saving most is the best we can do." He organized the assault with practiced efficiency, soldiers' instincts overriding the tremor that wanted to make his hands useless. The adrenaline helped, combat readiness pushing his failing body harder than it should go. Sarah found him before the attack began. "Don't do anything stupid like leading the charge yourself. I'm the king. Leading from the front is literally my job. You're also my mate." Sarah's eyes flashed with possessive fire. "And I'm not losing you in some heroic sacrifice play." The bond flared between them, both their wolves responding to the mate's protective instinct. Magnus pulled her close, inhaling her scent, memorizing this moment in case it was their last. "I'll come back to you," he promised. "We have too much left to figure out." "Damn right we do." Sarah kissed him hard. "Don't make me a widow before I've even been properly married." The assault began with the dawn. Magnus shifted into his dire wolf form, the transformation easier with adrenaline flooding his system. Beside him, 500 heavy infantry marched in testudo formation, shields locked overhead. The Wraiths fired arrows with inhuman accuracy, but most bounced off the shield wall. Magnus hit the valley floor at full sprint, his massive wolf form bowling over enemy scouts. Around him, cavalry charged through the passage like an iron tide. The Wraiths fought with mechanical precision, no fear, no self-preservation. They simply attacked until destroyed, every movement calculated for maximum damage. Magnus felt his age in every impact, his body protesting the violence. But the bond kept him anchored, Sarah's presence through the connection, a lifeline pulling him through the chaos. A massive Wraith warrior charged him with a dark enchanted axe. Magnus dodged the first swing, lunged inside the creature's guard, jaws clamping on its neck. The taste was corruption and decay, but he bit down harder until vertebrae cracked. He sensed rather than saw the next attack, rolling aside as another Wraith's claws raked where his belly had been. Then Sarah was there, her smaller silver wolf form hitting the attacker like lightning, Alpha Prime power making her supernaturally fast. They fought as the bond vision had shown, perfect synchronization, each covering the other's weaknesses. The connection let them communicate without words, tactical adjustments flowing through shared instinct. The battle lasted 3 hours. 200 of Magnus's soldiers fell, but they broke through, secured the pass, cleared the route forward. Magnus shifted back to human form and surveyed the carnage. 200 families would receive death notifications, but 2,800 people would live to see Iron Fortress. The math was brutal but clear. They were buying survival one sacrifice at a time. Sarah rejoined him, bloodied but alive. Through the bond, he felt her exhaustion matching his own. "We can't keep doing this." "We'll keep doing it as long as we have to," Magnus replied. "Until we reach the fortress or there's nothing left to defend." The column reached Iron Fortress 3 days later, stumbling through the mountain pass on pure determination. The ancient stronghold rose from stone like a promise carved into the earth, walls 40 feet high, watchtowers scanning approaches, but blocking the gates stood an army. 3,000 soldiers in formation, and at their head, mounted on a white horse, sat a young man with golden amber eyes exactly like Magnus's own. Prince Theron had come to claim his throne, and he had enough soldiers to take it by force. Magnus's exhausted refugees ground to a halt, trapped between the Wraith army pursuing them and the rebel army blocking sanctuary. 3,000 civilians who'd survived impossible odds, now caught in a vice between two enemies. Sarah moved to Magnus's side, hand on her weapon. Through the bond, he felt her combat calculations, threat assessments, survival scenarios, none of them good. Theron urged his horse forward until he was 50 yards away. "Magnus Ironclaw, tyrant king, murderer of my mother. I've come to free this kingdom from your corrupt rule." Magnus felt everything crystallize into this single moment. The son he'd searched for, the heir he needed, the rebellion that could destroy them all. And standing between him and that young man, nothing but truth and words. He stepped forward, unarmed, exhausted, every one of his 55 years visible in the morning light. Behind him, 3,000 people waited to see if their king could talk his way out of an execution. The entire kingdom balanced on what happened next. Time to see if blood was thicker than propaganda. Time to see if the moon goddess's plan included reconciliation or just more tragedy. Magnus locked eyes with the son he'd never known and began to speak. 50 yards between Magnus and the son who'd been raised to kill him. 3,000 rebels waiting for the order to attack. 3,000 refugees waiting to see if their king could prevent slaughter through words alone. "Theron," Magnus called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "If Elena was your mother, you know she never lied. Tell me, did she ever say I murdered her?" The young man's jaw tightened. "She said you exiled her for failing to give you an heir. She died alone, giving birth to a son you never wanted." Each word was a knife, but Magnus forced himself to respond calmly. "Your mother died in my arms 3 days after giving birth. The healers couldn't stop the fever. Her last words were about you, about a son who lived. I spent 10 years searching every corner of this kingdom trying to find you." "Lies," Theron spat. "I have the exile decree, your signature, your seal." Sarah stepped forward then, her Alpha Prime presence making Theron's horse shy nervously. "Let him share memories with you, the same way we verified the traitor. If he's lying, you'll know. If he's telling truth, you'll know that too. And if I refuse, then you're a coward hiding behind convenient lies." Sarah's voice cut like a blade. "The truth is harder than the story you've been fed, so you'd rather believe the fantasy." Magnus saw Theron's hand move to his sword, saw pride warring with uncertainty in those amber eyes so like his own. "I'm not afraid of truth," Theron said finally. He dismounted and walked forward. "But if this is a trap, my forces will kill everyone behind you." "Understood." Magnus pulled the last of the memory wine from his belt pouch. It had served them well, revealing Maris's betrayal and Silas's paternity. Now it would either give him a son or confirm him as a liar. They met in the middle ground, two men who shared blood but nothing else. Magnus uncorked the vial and drank, the bitter liquid familiar now. Then he extended his hand. Theron gripped his palm and the world exploded into shared consciousness. Magnus showed him everything. Elena radiant and laughing in the palace gardens. The stillborn child the healers had presented, blue and lifeless. The grief that consumed them both. Elena's fever, her delirium, her final words that Magnus had taken as fever dreams rather than prophecy. The years of searching afterward, the leads that went nowhere, the growing certainty that Elena's last words had been just ravings, the loneliness of ruling without her, the slow erosion of hope. In return, Theron's memories flooded Magnus's mind. Childhood in rebel camps, raised by soldiers who told him his father was a monster, training to be a weapon of vengeance. The exile decree shown on his 16th birthday, Magnus's signature perfect, the royal seal authentic. But there, in the corner of that memory, Magnus saw him. Lord Silas Gravenmore, watching the young prince's reaction from shadows. Understanding crashed through Magnus. Silas hadn't just hidden his paternity, he'd orchestrated Theron's indoctrination, created the exile forgery, positioned his biological son on the throne while grooming his grandson as backup. Political chess played across 30 years. The memory sharing ended, and both men stumbled apart. Magnus saw the shock in Theron's face, the dawning realization that everything he'd believed was built on lies. "You loved her," Theron said, voice rough. "I saw it. You loved her and me, and you've been searching." Magnus nodded, not trusting his voice. Through the bond, he felt Sarah's fierce pride in him, her support wrapping around his heart. "They lied to me," Theron continued, looking back at his army. 30 years of lies. He turned to Magnus. "Why? What did they gain by turning me against you? Ask them." Magnus gestured toward where Silas stood among the other officers. Ask the man who created the forgery what he hoped to accomplish. But there wasn't time. A scout came running from the southern approach, panic clear in her voice. "Wraith army, 10,000 strong, 2 hours out and moving fast." The entire gathering went silent. 10,000 Wraiths versus Magnus's 1,500 exhausted soldiers and Theron's 3,000 rebels. Even united, the odds were overwhelming. Theron looked at Magnus, decades of indoctrination warring with newly shared truth. "We can fight each other and guarantee the Wraiths win, or we combine forces and maybe survive long enough to sort out our family drama." Magnus felt hope flare for the first time in days. Not a reconciliation, not yet, but a tactical alliance. It was more than he'd dared hope for. "Your forces know these mountains," Magnus said. "Mine know siege defense. Together we might hold the fortress long enough for reinforcements to arrive." "Reinforcements from where? We're the last army standing." "Then we make it count." Magnus extended his hand again, not for memory sharing, but for the oldest compact known to wolves, alliance through clasped forearms. Theron stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he gripped Magnus's forearm in a warrior's bond. "For the kingdom. We'll settle who rules it after we save it." The fortress gates swung open, and two armies that had been enemies 30 seconds ago became allies through shared desperation. Refugees and rebels poured inside, tactical efficiency overriding political tensions. Magnus found himself organizing defenses alongside the son he'd just met, their shared military training creating easy coordination despite the emotional chaos beneath. The Wraith army appeared on the southern horizon 90 minutes later, a dark tide that seemed to have no end. Magnus stood on the battlements with Sarah, Theron, and his senior commanders, watching death approach in organized formation. At the center of that army, riding her shadow horse, the Wraith Queen surveyed her prey. "She's come personally," Sarah observed. "That means she knows about me, about the Alpha Prime." "Which makes you the primary target," Magnus said, possessive fury rising in his chest. "She'll try to kill you first, eliminate the biggest threat." "Let her try." Sarah's eyes had taken on a silver tint, the Alpha Prime power rising to the surface. "I'm done running." Through the bond, Magnus felt her determination, her readiness to die if it meant protecting these people. It terrified and awed him in equal measure. Theron cleared his throat. "I have demolition charges placed on 3 mountain peaks surrounding the fortress. If we can draw the Wraith army into the valley and trigger controlled avalanche, we could bury most of them. That would also trap us in the fortress, one of Magnus's officers objected. Better trapped alive than dead, Theron countered. We can dig out later. Magnus studied the geography, the tactical possibilities. It could work. But timing would be everything. They'd need the Wraith Queen to commit her full force, needed her close enough that the avalanche would catch her. How do we make her commit? Magnus asked. Sarah's hand found his, the bond pulsing between them. You offer her what she wants, an Alpha Prime. No. The word came out as an alpha command, Magnus's wolf snarling at the idea of using his mate as bait. Absolutely not. It's the only way, Sarah said gently. She won't fully commit unless she sees a prize worth the risk. I'm that prize. Then we find another way. There is no other way. Sarah turned to face him fully. Magnus, we both saw the vision when the bond activated. This is what I was born for. This is why the moon goddess made me an Alpha Prime and bonded me to you, so I could be in exactly this place at exactly this moment. The bond let him feel her certainty, her acceptance of what came next. It didn't make it hurt less. I just found you, Magnus said, his voice breaking. Don't ask me to lose you. You're not losing me. Sarah cupped his face in her hands. You're trusting me to do what I was meant to do. Have faith in your mate, Alpha King. The words steadied something in Magnus's chest. She was right. Fighting destiny wouldn't change it, would only make the sacrifice meaningless. 4 hours, he said. You stand on the southern wall where she can see you. We hold defensive positions and bleed them. When the Wraith Queen commits personally, when she's in the kill zone, you hit her with everything you have. Stun her long enough for me to deliver the killing blow. Then Theron triggers the avalanche and we bury whatever's left. The plan was insane, dependent on perfect timing and considerable luck. But it was all they had. Sarah kissed him then, fierce and desperate, in front of armies and commanders, and the son Magnus had just found. Let them see. Let them know she was claimed, that she fought for more than just duty. When they broke apart, Sarah's eyes had gone fully silver. The Alpha Prime was rising to meet her destiny. The Wraith army attacked at noon, waves of undead soldiers hitting the fortress walls with mechanical precision. Magnus's forces held the battlements while Theron's rebels reinforced weak points. For the first time since the palace, humans were fighting as a unified force. But the Wraiths kept coming. For every 10 that fell, 20 more took their place. And the dead were rising again, necromantic power making corpses into weapons. Sarah stood prominently on the southern wall, her Alpha Prime aura impossible to miss. Every Wraith eye tracked toward her like iron to a lodestone. The Wraith Queen noticed. Magnus watched through his spyglass as the ancient vampire turned her death's head toward the fortress, focusing on Sarah with predatory intensity. Then the Queen raised her hand, and the entire Wraith army stopped attacking. Her voice rang out, power making the stones vibrate. Alpha King, surrender the Prime and I'll spare your people. Keep her and everyone dies. You have until sunset to decide. Magnus felt every eye on the battlements turned toward him, saw soldiers calculating the cold math of survival. 1 life for thousands. He stepped to the wall's edge where both armies could see him. You'll have to take her, because we don't surrender our own. A foolish choice, the Queen replied, but expected. Very well. At sunset, I'll take her myself. The threat landed exactly as Magnus had hoped. The Queen had committed to a personal assault at a specific time. Now they just had to survive until then and spring the trap. The hours until sunset were brutal. The Wraiths probed every weakness, testing defenses, bleeding Magnus's forces. Ammunition ran low, soldiers fell. The wounded overwhelmed the medical tents. But they held. Inch by bloody inch they held. As the sun touched the horizon, the Wraith Queen entered the battlefield personally. Her elite guard of ancient vampires surrounded her, and together they moved through the courtyard like death incarnate. Magnus watched from the second wall, every muscle tensed. Not yet. The Queen needed to get deeper into the kill zone. Sarah stood at the wall's edge, hands beginning to glow with silver light. The Queen looked up at her and smiled, cold and predatory. Alpha Prime, the Queen called. I can smell your divine blood from here. Come with me willingly, and I'll make your death quick. Sarah's response was to unleash a blast of Alpha Prime power that lit up the courtyard like a star. Wraiths shrieked as their undead flesh burned. The Queen's expression shifted from amusement to anger. She gestured, and her elite guard charged forward. Now, Magnus sent through the bond. He shifted to his dire wolf form and leaped from the wall, landing in the midst of combat. Around him, his best soldiers engaged the elite guard in brutal melee. The Wraith Queen watched with calculating eyes, waiting for an opening, waiting for Sarah to exhaust herself. Magnus fought his way toward the Queen, trying to draw her attention. If he could engage her directly, keep her focused on him instead of Sarah, it might buy precious seconds. The Queen noticed his approach and smiled. She dismounted and drew a sword forged from shadow itself. "The Iron King," she said. "I killed your wife, you know." Elena begged beautifully at the end. The words were meant to enrage him. Magnus felt the fury rise but channeled it into cold focus. This creature had taken Elena, had tried to destroy his kingdom, had forced them into this desperate last stand. She would die tonight. Magnus would make certain of it. He lunged, his dire wolf form giving him size and power. The Queen met him with that shadow blade, and the impact sent shockwaves through the courtyard. They circled, two apex predators seeking advantage. The bond pulsed as Sarah continued burning through her Alpha Prime power, keeping the necromantic magic from overwhelming their forces. Magnus could feel her life force draining with each blast, aging her with every use. He attacked again, jaws seeking the Queen's throat. She dodged with inhuman speed, and her blade opened a gash along his ribs. Pain exploded, but Magnus ignored it, spinning to rake claws across her perfect face. The Queen hissed as black blood wept from 4 parallel cuts. "You're stronger than expected, but mortal strength is just delayed death." She gestured and shadows came alive, tendrils wrapping around Magnus's legs, draining his energy. He struggled, but the darkness was relentless. The Queen approached, savoring her victory. "I'm going to enjoy breaking you." Sarah's power exploded outward like a supernova. Pure divine light flooded the courtyard, and every wraith caught in its radius screamed. The shadow tendrils holding Magnus disintegrated. The Wraith Queen stumbled, momentarily blinded and disoriented. Magnus didn't hesitate. He shifted back to human form, drew the blessed silver blade he'd been saving for this exact moment, and drove it through the Queen's chest with every ounce of strength left in his failing body. The blade punched through ancient armor and undead flesh, finding the desiccated heart. The Queen's eyes went wide with shock. "For Elena," Magnus said. "For everyone you've killed. For my kingdom." He twisted the blade. Holy fire spread from the wound, consuming the Queen from inside. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as her body crumbled to ash. She collapsed, and as she died, every wraith she'd created simply stopped. 12,000 undead soldiers fell where they stood, the necromantic power animating them severed. Silence fell across the battlefield. Then someone cheered. One voice became hundreds, became thousands. Victory against impossible odds. Magnus stood over the Queen's ashes and felt nothing but exhaustion. Sarah collapsed and he caught her, seeing through the bond how much that final power surge had cost. Her hair had gone completely white, her face lined with age that hadn't been there hours before. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually won." "You did it," Magnus corrected, holding her close. "You saved us all." Theron appeared, bloodied but alive. "The charges, Father. Should I trigger them?" The word "father" hit Magnus in the chest. "No need. The battle's over." He met his son's eyes. "We won." In the days that followed, Magnus learned the true cost of victory. 5,000 dead since the palace evacuation. Aldrich and his rear guard. The volunteers left at various points. Countless soldiers whose names Magnus would never know. But 8,000 lived. 8,000 people who would rebuild, who would remember, who would create the future. Sarah recovered slowly. The Alpha Prime power stabilized now that combat was over. But the aging was permanent. She'd sacrificed 30 years of her life in 3 days of channeling divine power. Magnus didn't care. He'd take 30 years with her over a century alone. 3 months after the battle, Magnus formally crowned Theron as Crown Prince, establishing succession at last. The ceremony was simple, held in a rebuilt throne room that still smelled of fresh timber. Later, Theron approached him privately. "I've been thinking about reforms, the systems that failed us during this crisis. They need to change." "Then change them." Magnus gripped his son's shoulder. "Build something better than what I gave you." "Will you help me?" "I could use a father's guidance, for as long as I'm able." The degenerative condition was progressing steadily now, but Magnus had time. Enough to help Theron transition into power, enough to build a life with Sarah. enough to make peace with the warrior he'd been and the man he was becoming. 5 years later, Magnus retired from active rule, passing the crown to Theron in a ceremony attended by representatives from across the kingdom. He and Sarah moved to a small estate in the countryside, finally finding the peace that had eluded them during the war. Magnus died at 60, his body finally giving out after decades of battle. Sarah felt the exact moment through the bond, their connection releasing gently as his heart stopped. She buried him beside Elena, honoring both the wife he'd loved and the mate he'd found. Sarah lived another 10 years, spending her time writing the definitive account of the war. When she finally died, Theron buried her beside Magnus. On her headstone, he had inscribed, "Captain Sarah Blackthorne, Alpha Prime, the woman who saved a kingdom." The bond mark remained visible on both their bodies, even in death, a silver wolf's paw print over their hearts. Proof that some connections transcend mortality. And in the royal archive, preserved under glass, lay 2 items side by side: a cheap silver engagement ring and a blessed silver sword stained with the Wraith Queen's ashes, symbols of the life Sarah had planned and the life she'd lived. The kingdom they'd saved prospered under Theron's reforms. The story of the aging king and the warrior who found each other at the worst possible moment became legend. Some bonds transcend death, some loves transcend time, and some heroes never truly leave us. They become the light we follow home. The end.